Hello friends, I will be reading The Wild Robot chapters 61 through 65. Let's get started. Chapter 61, The Robot Stories. The story of how Roz helped Rockmouth spread through the river and across the island, and it was soon followed by other robot stories. There were stories of Roz growing gardens in the dry, barren places. There were stories of Roz nursing sick animals back to health. There were stories of Roz creating ropes and wheels and tools for helping her friends. But the most of the new stories were about the robot's wilderness. You see, Roz had noticed that the wilder she acted, the more animals liked her, and so she barked with the foxes and sang with the birds, hissed with the snake. She romped with the weasels and she sunbathed with the lizard. She leaped with the deer. That spring was a very wild time for our robot. Chapter 62, The Return. It was a quiet afternoon on the pond, but the quiet was gradually being overtaken by sounds not heard around for many months. The sound grew louder and louder, and then a flock of geese appeared over the trees. Honk, honk, honk. Most flocks of geese moved lazily through the sky and trailed off in wobbly lines. But not this one. This flock was fast. It flew in a perfect V formation, and it was led by a small, graceful goose. The flock flew once around the pond before gliding down and gently splashing into the water. The geese gathered into a tight group in the middle of the pond. They floated there for a while, softly honking to one another, and then the leader broke away from the others. He swam straight towards the nest, waddling to the garden and fluttering up to his mother's shoulders. "Welcome home, son," said Roz. "It's good to be back, Ma," said Bright Bill. Chapter 36, The Journey. After months of separation, Roz and Bright Bill, mother and son, were together again, and they had so much catching up to do. They went into the nest, and the robot built a fire. Then the geese gazed into the flames and told stories of his winter. This is what he said. "We spent the whole first day of our migration flying over the ocean. It seemed like the ocean would go on forever. But just when the flock was getting tired, Longneck pointed to some tiny islands on the horizon. We flew down to one of the islands and ate dung grass and rested our wings. After a few days of hopping from the island to island, we reached the main island and continued over fields and forests. And then snow began to fall. I'd never seen snow before, and at first I thought it was beautiful, but then it just kept coming. The others explained that the snow was early, that we were never supposed to see it, but there it was, piling up around us as we tried to sleep at night. Longneck worried that the weakest geese wouldn't survive. And he was right. We lost Ode Widefoot to that very first snowstorm. Oh, that's sad. We tried to fly around the snowy weather, but we got completely lost and the weather became even worse. Lakes and ponds and rivers began freezing over. We couldn't find food or water, so we ate snow. And that only made us colder. We had trouble cleaning ourselves and and our feathers became dirty and heavy. The flock was in a bad shape, but Longneck kept moving. "We are geese," he squawked, "and geese keep going. One day we were struggling through a snow shower when we saw something called a farm. It had perfectly square fields and enormous buildings. And stomping her way through the farm was a robot. She looked just like you, Ma." Longneck sent me over to speak to the robot, but I couldn't understand anything she said, so I just followed her through the farm and around a corner, and then I saw something I never expected. Plants! Bright, colorful plants! I didn't understand how plants could live in such a cold weather. But then I saw that they were actually inside a building. I learned later that buildings were called a greenhouse. And it had clear walls made out of something called glass. The robot pressed a button on the wall, and the door slid open, and the warm air came rushing out. I hadn't felt warmth in so long. I just had to follow her inside. Ma, it was like summer there. The air was warm and sweet and sticky. I wonder why it was sticky. And there rows and rows of different plants, and there were rows and rows of different plants. The robot didn't pay any attention to me, so I wandered around the greenhouse, nibbling on leaves and drinking from the puddles. Then I heard a scratchy voice behind me. If I were younger, I would want to kill you by now." I sprung around, and there was an old cat. She walked up on stiff legs, and her fur was gray and clumpy. The cat's name was Snooks, and she didn't seem very nice. But then she saw other geese out in the cold, their faces pressed against the glass, and she told me how to open the door. "You can rest here," said Snooks, and the flock hurried in. "But stay out of sight." "You can rest here," said Snooks, as the flock hurried in. "But stay out of sight. Humans aren't as friendly as me." None of us knew what humans were, but we didn't care. We weren't just happy to be out of the cold. Loudwing was so happy she cried. The flock drank and ate and bathed and slept and stayed out of the way. Snooks showed us where to leave our droppings so they wouldn't be noticed. And for a few days, the greenhouse was our home. Once or twice a day, the robot would go outside and return with a box or a bag. Most of the time, she stayed inside and quietly worked on the plants. There was a barn that I just had to explore. It was filled with animals and machines and piles of straw and two robots. One of the robots was fixing a broken door. When I walked in, she was using a loud spinning tool called a saw. She pushed the saw through a long piece of wood, and dust shot into the air. Everything was going smoothly until the saw suddenly launched forward and sliced right through 3 of the robot's fingers. But she was fine. A minute later, there was a thwip sound, and she popped out a new hand. Then she went right back to using a saw again. The other robots worked with the animals: chickens, sheep, pigs, and cow. They were all in cages. The chickens kept asking me, The chickens kept asking me how I'd gotten out of my cage. I explained that I had a cage. I heard panicked and squawked coming from the greenhouse. I ran back and found that a human had discovered the flock. We didn't know what he was saying, but he looked really angry. Longneck tried to defend us. He got in front and spread his wings and honked. The human wasn't afraid. He pulled out a long, shiny stick and pointed it right at Longneck. Snooks hissed, Look out, he's got a rifle. Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot out of the rifle, and Longneck slumped to the floor, and he was dead, Ma. The flock was so scared, we fluttered around and honked and knocked over the plants. But the human kept moving toward us, pointing his rifle, so I pecked the button to open the door, and we ran outside into the cold and flew away from there as fast as we could. The flock was so scared we fluttered around and honked and knocked over plants, but the human kept moving toward us and pointing the rifle, so I pecked the button and to open the door, and we ran outside into the cold and flew away from there as fast as we could. Without Longneck, the flock needed a new leader. Everyone wanted me to be the leader, but I don't know what to do. So I started by repeating Longneck's words. I squawked, "We are geese," and geese keep going. Then I took the point and waved the flock spread behind me. The weather had us all turned around and nobody knew which way to go. So I just led us straight south. We saw more robots and humans and buildings, but we didn't stop. We knew we were way off course when we saw the ocean again. But at last, it was a little warmer by the water, so I decided to follow the coastline for a while. There were more buildings by the coast. There were more buildings on the coast. Most of them were on land, but some of them were in the ocean. The ocean buildings were dirty and crumbling and leaning in different directions. There weren't any humans or robots in those buildings, only sea creatures. We saw ships on the water. We saw ships on the land. We even saw ships in the air. They buzzed through the sky like giant dragonflies. And when they reached places called a city, there were thousands of buildings and robots and humans. The ship were all close together. When we stopped to rest on the rooftop, we met a friendly pigeon named Graybeak. She had grown up there, so she knew everything about the city. About the city. She flew us over towers and under bridges and kept us away from all the buzzing airships. And everywhere we went, there were robots. Some of the city robots were just like you, Ma. Others crawled on 6 legs or rolled on wheels. Others slid up and down the sides of the building. Some robots were really small and some were really big. They moved things and cleaned things and built things and did every kind of job you can think of. Graybeak brought us down to a ledge on the side of a building and told us to look through the window. Inside was a family of humans or other building things. We saw other humans Humans even seem to have robots. Okay, bye guys, we'll finish tomorrow.